Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Get started in 1 second. Tonight's class is, of course, dedicated to all the Jewish people, especially in the land of Israel, all those who need healing, all those who need rescuing, and all those who need protection. If you would like to sponsor a class, please let us know. Our sponsorships help us continue to do these classes. And if you would like to, if you have any questions or comments, you can leave a comment below. We love to interact, and if you have any questions. Okay, in this week's class, we're going to be discussing a fascinating idea about what it means that the Abraham, by this week's Torah portion, talks about Abraham and the battle of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings, Abraham's origin story, if you will. And in this week's Torah portion, in Genesis chapter 14, Abraham is referred to as Ivri, which is commonly translated as the Hebrew. And the $1,000,000 question is, of course, why is Abraham called the Hebrew? So the Medrash explains as follows. This is in Bereshis Rabbah. The Medrash explains, Rabbi Yehuda says, the entire world was on one side, and he was on the other side. So Ivri means from over there, from the other side. And Abraham was going against the grain. And so what are we referring to? We're referring to Abraham's belief in God, right? The entire world was worshiping idols at that time. Abraham believed in God, and so therefore he was on the other side of everyone else. All right. So in this week's Torah portion, we see that not only that it was Abraham, his beliefs were different in his believing in God, his morality was different. Abraham's wife is kidnapped by the Pharaoh, his wife is kidnapped by Avimelech, in contrast to the land of Canaan, where Abraham is told to go, where you have Sodom and Gomorrah, where obviously the morality was totally corrupted, where they outlawed charity and hospitality. Abraham was the polar opposite of that. And this is Abraham's whole life story, right? He's always on the other side of everyone else. So let's talk about this war of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. So the story goes that a war breaks out in the Middle East. You have a battle of 4 kings versus the 5 kings. And what happened was they captured his nephew, Lot, who was living in Sodom at that time. And the Torah tells us that the fugitive, who later we find out is Og, comes and tells Abraham that Lot has been captured, and Abraham fights all by himself. Right, that him and his he has his household. He has about what it says in the Torah. He had 318 men. Okay, and they took on the 5 kings, and that's that. So the question is, how is it possible for Abraham to survive and to thrive being the minority? He's always the minority. He's the minority. We said in his morality, he's the minority in his monotheistic beliefs. He's the minority. Even when he has to go to war to save his family, nobody helps him. He's just him and his 300 guys. Again, and following, he takes the side of the 4 kings, fights the 5 kings who are stronger, and he has to do everything himself. And Og, this giant who had told Abraham about the situation, he was invited to Isaac's bar mitzvah. Okay, this Medrash recounts Isaac's bar mitzvah, which happens in next week's Torah portion or 2 weeks Torah portion, whatever it is, and everyone starts to make fun of Og, this giant, and they say, Og, you told us that Abraham will never have kids. And he's like, what? So now he has kids. This guy, this little baby Isaac, I'm a giant. I could crush him with my finger. And God says to Og, I'm telling you that actually this Isaac, this little baby, his descendants, he wasn't a baby, it was his bar mitzvah, but this little guy, right, his descendant, Moses, is going to kill you. Right? And that's what ends up happening, of course. So the question is, so we see that even this idea is already dressed in the Medrash And the question is, what benefit is there to being the minority? And the Lubavitcher Rebbe asked this exact question, and the Rebbe asked two basic ideas. Number one is, how can the minority survive the majority? Number one. Number two, even if they achieve something, the only thing they could achieve is self-preservation, right? And so in other words, even if the minority survives, it's always the minority. It's never the majority. And we see that not only that, we see that the Torah says specifically, the Torah calls us the God calls us the Kem Hamat Mikol Hamim, that you are the smallest of all the nations. Not only that, not only are we considered the smallest of all the nations, in fact, our sages warn us against converting people. And in other words, so not only are we the smallest nation, but we're supposed to stay small. We're not supposed to embrace the entire world as Jewish, right? The whole point of Judaism is that the Jewish people could be Jewish, the non-Jewish could be non-Jewish, and we all have a purpose in this world. But the point of the Jewish people is to be the smallest nation and to continue to stay small. And not only that, we see not just on a level of demographics are we a small nation, but also when it comes to a person's personal service of God and their spiritual pursuits. We know it says that the patriarchs were considered a merkava, which literally translates as a chariot. And the idea is that a chariot cannot do anything without something pulling the chariot. In the case of historically, it was horses, more modern times, an engine. And the point is that the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our patriarchs, they were a chariot to God. They just did whatever God told them to do. Every single movement they made was only because God told them to, only because they were fulfilling the divine will. However, and even when they were sleeping, which is a tremendous feat. However, we know that most people can't do that. Most people cannot accomplish such spiritual things. So a regular person is that most people are not on such a level, and our spiritual pursuits are a minority of our time. Most of the time in a person's life, they're sleeping, they're eating, they're drinking, they're doing business, they're involved in worldly matters. It's on a very small level that they have the opportunity to pray, study, etc. So, and even and especially look, the more you go out of a person's life, yes, maybe a person in yeshiva has a little more time to study, but even within that, it's definitely not most of their day. And again, you look over a person's life, it's very hard for them to find time for spirituality. So, how is it? So again, not only are we a minority demographically, but also on a spiritual level, our spiritual pursuits are a minority. So the Rebbe answers this question with a fascinating idea from science. And the Rebbe discusses this idea that there that there have been developed at that time. Of course, we all know, and this is from a talk in the early 1950s. There was atomic energy, and the Rebbe explained that one of the earth-shattering discoveries of atomic energy was that inside an atom, they could find by not only the atom, and the Rebbe went on to explain, not only is that the atom has so much energy, this one atom, which is a molecule of, it's not really visible to the naked eye, right? It's one molecule within a molecule of an organism or a material. That actually, it's not even the atom itself, but by splitting the atom, when you split the atom, they found this tremendous amount of energy. And obviously, at that time, it was used for negative things, but we've seen over time nuclear energy be used for positive as well. And we see that this small amount of material was used and could be used for transforming an entire place. It could transform the world, as we saw at that time. And what the Rebbe learned from this is that actually we see that from science, from this discovery of atomic energy, it's not all about the quantity. There's a qualitative, there's a way that specifically through the smallest thing we can find a qualitative advantage of over the quantity. And that was an amazing discovery. And the Rebbe used this idea to teach how Abraham lived his life. Abraham being this minority, being the Hebrew, being the one from the other side, how he was able to transform the world. It says that Abraham, even in his youth, he was against the grain. That in last week's Torah portion, we learned about the Tower of Babel, how the entire nation, the entire world was all united against God, and they were all united against God. And it says they were also all united against Abraham. That Abraham actually had participated at some point with this project, and eventually realized that this was against God. And Abraham discovers his spirituality. He leaves that project, and we all know what happens. That project fails, and Abraham goes on to become the creator of of monotheism, which today, probably the majority of the world, or a very large plurality of the world, believes in one God because of Abraham, because Abraham stood up, and he found he tapped into his own atomic energy, and really, it's a tremendous. It really is a tremendous lesson for us that Abraham was not, at his time, and at no time was Abraham ever, some massive movement that convinced everybody. But what he found within every person, that they had this spark, they had this idea that they could connect to. And the Rebbe used this idea to teach people that it's not always about how many people you have and how big of a crowd you have and how many people you're influencing at this time, but that there's qualitative advantage. And we could see from atomic energy how important it is, every single individual person or atom. Thank you very much for joining. Have a great Shabbos, and we will see you, God willing, next week.